Iman. For 27 years, I believed that success meant climbing someone else's ladder, wearing expensive clothes, and collecting titles that impressed people at dinner parties. Instead, I discovered that real power comes from building something quietly, strategically, while everyone else is busy looking down on you. My sister Claire thought my coffee shop job was a joke, something to laugh about at her fancy corporate events. She had no idea I was playing a completely different game, one that would end with her husband's CEO shaking my hand and calling me the new owner of everything she thought mattered. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning my sister's world crumbled, I was wearing a brown apron and serving lattes to construction workers. By evening, I was signing papers that would change everything she believed about success, family, and who really held the power. Sometimes the people who underestimate you the most are the ones who hand you the keys to their kingdom without even realizing it. The October morning air in Riverside, Colorado carried that crisp bite that makes you pull your jacket tighter. As you walk, I pushed through the glass door of Mountain View Coffee and Bakery, the bell chiming softly above my head, signaling the start of another shift that my sister would have called beneath me. The familiar smell of ground coffee beans and fresh pastries wrapped around me like a comfortable embrace, a stark contrast to the sterile perfection of the corporate world Claire inhabited just 20 minutes away in the business district. Morning, Anna, called Beth Rodriguez from behind the espresso machine, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail that somehow still managed to look effortlessly stylish. She'd been my closest friend since high school, the only person who knew that my life wasn't quite what it appeared to be on the surface. You ready for the breakfast rush? I tied my apron around my waist, the brown fabric soft from countless washings, and glanced at the clock. 7:30 in the morning meant 30 minutes before the flood of caffeine-dependent office workers would descend upon us like locusts. 30 minutes of peace before I had to smile and pretend that serving coffee was the extent of my ambitions. Always ready, I replied, checking the pastry display and adjusting a tray of cinnamon rolls that Beth had arranged with the precision of an artist. The truth was, I genuinely enjoyed this part of my day. There was something honest about making coffee, something real about the brief conversations with regulars who knew my name and asked about my weekend plans. It was more authentic than anything I'd experienced during my brief stint in the corporate world, before I discovered that wearing a suit and sitting in meetings wasn't the path to the life I actually wanted. The first customers began trickling. In around 8, construction workers from the development project across the street, nurses finishing night shifts at the hospital, early commuters grabbing their fuel for the day ahead. I moved through the familiar rhythm of taking orders, operating the register, calling out names as drinks were ready. To anyone watching, I looked like exactly what Claire had accused me of being during our last family dinner, a 27-year-old woman with a college degree wasting her potential on minimum wage work. What Claire didn't know, what nobody in my family knew, was that Mountain View Coffee and Bakery was just one piece of a puzzle I'd been assembling for the past 3 years. The coffee shop wasn't my career, it was my cover and my education rolled into one convenient package. While I learned the restaurant business from the ground up, understanding everything from supply chain management to customer psychology, I was quietly using my real skills, the ones I'd developed during those late nights studying business and finance, to build something much larger. The irony wasn't lost on me that while Claire sat in her glass office at Summit Industries, managing accounts and attending board meetings that she considered the height of professional achievement, I was standing behind a coffee counter gaining the kind of practical business knowledge that no MBA program could teach. Every difficult customer taught me about conflict resolution. Every busy morning showed me how to manage workflow under pressure. Every month that we exceeded our sales targets reminded me that success came from understanding what people actually needed, not what some market research report claimed they wanted. Around 10:30, during the mid-morning lull when the breakfast crowd had dispersed and the lunch rush was still hours away, my phone buzzed with a text message that I almost ignored. Claire's name appeared on the screen, and experience had taught me that communication from my sister usually fell into one of 2 categories: requests for favors or opportunities for her to remind me how much more successful she was than me. Family dinner Sunday at Mom and Dad's. Try to look presentable. Ryan's bringing his boss from Summit. I stared at the message for a long moment, feeling that familiar tightness in my chest that came whenever Claire managed to pack multiple insults into a single sentence. Try to look presentable. As if my usual appearance was somehow offensive to her sensibilities. As if my choice to work in food service was a personal embarrassment that reflected poorly on her carefully curated image. Beth noticed my expression as she wiped down the counter nearby. Let me guess. Your sister reminding you about your place in the family hierarchy? She wants me to look presentable for dinner because Ryan's boss is coming. I slipped the phone back into my apron pocket. Apparently my existence is an embarrassment that needs to be managed. You know what's actually embarrassing? Beth said, her voice carrying that edge it always got when she talked about Claire. Being so insecure about your own success that you have to constantly put down your sister to feel better about yourself. The lunch rush arrived with its usual intensity, waves of customers flowing through the door in patterns that had become as predictable as the tide. Office workers from the financial district, stay-at-home parents meeting for coffee dates, students from the community college cramming between classes. I moved through the choreography of service with practiced efficiency, each interaction brief, but genuine. It was during this busy period that Tom Harrison walked through the door. I recognized him immediately, not because we'd ever met, but because his picture appeared regularly in the local business journal as the CEO of Summit Industries, Ryan's company and one of the largest employers in Riverside. He was younger than I'd expected, probably in his early 40s, with the kind of confident bearing that came from making decisions that affected thousands of people. What surprised me wasn't his presence in our coffee shop, it was how he waited. Patiently in line like any other customer, checking his phone occasionally but not acting like his time was more valuable than everyone else's. When he reached the counter, he smiled with what seemed like genuine warmth. "Good afternoon. I'll take a large dark roast, black, and whatever pastry you'd recommend." "The apple turnovers are excellent today," I said, already reaching for a cup. "We make them fresh every morning." "Perfect. I trust your judgment." As I prepared his order, I found myself studying him with the analytical eye I developed over years of watching people. There was something about his manner, the way he spoke to Beth when she handed him the pastry, the way he thanked the customer who held the door for him, that suggested he was the kind of leader who understood that respect was earned rather than demanded. "Are you new to the area?" I asked as I handed him his coffee, the question genuine rather than just customer service small talk. "Actually, I've lived here for 15 years, but I usually grab coffee closer to the office. I had a meeting at the development across the street and decided to try somewhere new." He took a sip and nodded approvingly. "I'm glad I did. This is excellent coffee." "We take pride in quality," I said, meaning it. "I hope your meeting went well." It did, actually. We're always looking for local businesses to partner with for our employee programs. "Mind if I take a few business cards?" I handed him a small stack from the holder near the register, watching as he slipped them into his jacket pocket with the careful attention of someone who followed through on casual promises. Most people who asked for business cards were just being polite, but something about his manner suggested he actually meant to use them. After he left, Beth appeared at my elbow with a knowing look. "Do you know who that was?" "Tom Harrison, CEO of Summit Industries. Ryan's boss. Your sister's husband's boss." Beth's grin was almost predatory. "Interesting that he's never been in here before today." "It's just a coincidence," I said, but even as I spoke the words, I felt that familiar stirring of possibility that had driven every major decision I'd made over the past 3 years. In business, as in life, coincidences were often opportunities wearing disguises. The afternoon passed in its usual rhythm, the steady flow of customers gradually slowing. As the day moved toward evening, I used the quieter moments to catch up on inventory reports and scheduling, tasks that most of my coworkers found tedious but that I genuinely enjoyed. There was something satisfying about the numbers adding up correctly, about seeing patterns in customer preferences and seasonal fluctuations that could be translated into better business decisions. At 5 o'clock, as I was preparing to close the register and hand the evening shift over to Kevin, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. A local area code but not one I recognized. "Anna Davis?" "Yes, this is Anna. This is Tom Harrison from Summit Industries. We met earlier today at your coffee shop." My hand tightened slightly on the phone. "Of course. How can I help you?" "I was wondering if you might have time to meet tomorrow morning. I'd like to discuss a potential business opportunity." The words hung in the air for a moment while I processed them. Business opportunity. From the CEO of Summit Industries. The same company where Ryan worked in middle management, the same success that Claire used as ammunition in her ongoing campaign to make me feel inferior. "I'd be very interested," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "What time works for you? Would 8:30 be too early? I could come to the coffee shop, or if you prefer, we could meet at my office." "The coffee shop is perfect. I'll be there." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. After I hung up, I stood for a moment in the relative quiet of the late afternoon shop, feeling as if the ground had shifted slightly beneath my feet. Beth was reorganizing the pastry display, humming softly to herself, unaware that the careful Balance I'd maintained for 3 years was about to be tested in ways I hadn't anticipated. "Everything okay?" she asked, noticing my expression. "Tom Harrison wants to meet tomorrow morning. About a business opportunity." Beth's hand stilled. "On the display case. What kind of business opportunity?" "I don't know yet. But I have a feeling it's going to change things." That evening, I sat in my small apartment above the used bookstore on Maple Street, surrounded by the quiet evidence of the life I'd built away from my family's expectations. The space was modest but comfortable, decorated with furniture I'd carefully chosen rather than inherited, books I'd actually read rather than displayed for show, artwork created by local artists whose names weren't famous but whose vision spoke to something real inside me. On my desk, next to my laptop and a stack of business journals, sat a folder that contained documents most people would have found surprising. Purchase agreements, partnership contracts, investment portfolios, business plans that stretched months and years into the future. The paperwork that proved Anna Davis the coffee shop employee was not the same person as Anna Davis the investor, the strategist, the woman who had been building an empire while her family assumed she was wasting her potential. I opened the folder and spread the documents across my desk, studying them with the satisfaction of an architect reviewing blueprints for a cathedral. 3 years of careful planning, strategic investments, and calculated risks that had positioned me in ways that even I hadn't fully appreciated until today. The coffee shop where I worked wasn't just my day job, it was my laboratory and my training ground. But it was also the flagship location of Mountain View Hospitality Group, a company I'd created and grown through a series of partnerships and acquisitions that had flown completely under the radar of the local business community. What had started as a single coffee shop had expanded to include 2 restaurants, a catering company, and a food truck operation that served corporate events throughout the region. The irony was almost too perfect. While Claire sat in her corporate office, managing other people's money and attending meetings about other people's strategies, I had been building the kind of business that Summit Industries regularly hired for their employee appreciation events, holiday parties, and client meetings. I had been operating in her husband's professional ecosystem for months without anyone making the connection. Tomorrow's meeting with Tom Harrison would either validate 3 years of careful planning or expose me to scrutiny I wasn't quite ready for. Either way, the game was about to change in ways that would force me to step out of the shadows I'd been comfortable operating in. I closed the folder and leaned back in my chair, looking out my window at the quiet street below. In 12 hours, I would sit down with the CEO of Summit Industries and discover whether the opportunity I'd been preparing for had finally arrived, or whether I needed to continue building my foundation in the anonymity I'd grown to appreciate. What I knew for certain was that tomorrow would mark the beginning of the end of my family's assumptions about who I was and what I was capable of achieving. The question wasn't whether I was ready for that conversation, it was whether they were ready for the truth about what I'd been building while they weren't paying attention. The girl who served coffee with a smile was about to introduce herself to the woman who owned the company that served it. And Tom Harrison, whether he knew it or not, was about to become the catalyst for a revelation that would reshape everything my sister thought she understood about success, family, and who really held the power in our little corner of Colorado. The morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that made the Rocky Mountains look close enough to touch. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror at 6:30, considering my reflection with the careful attention of someone preparing for a performance. The woman looking back at me had learned to move between worlds with practiced ease, comfortable in the brown apron of a coffee shop employee and equally at home in the boardroom attire hanging in the back of my closet. For today's meeting with Tom Harrison, I chose something that split the difference. Dark jeans, a crisp white button-down, and a navy blazer that looked professional without screaming corporate climber. The goal was to appear approachable yet competent, someone who belonged in both the service industry and the business world without drawing too much attention to the contradiction. By 7:15, I was downstairs in the coffee shop, moving through the opening routine with mechanical precision while my mind ran through potential scenarios for the meeting ahead. Beth wouldn't arrive until 8, which meant I had 45 minutes alone with my thoughts and the familiar comfort of preparing for another day of serving coffee to people who had no idea what else I was capable of. The register counted perfectly, as it always did. Inventory matched the previous night's numbers. The espresso machine hummed to life with its usual theatrical hiss and gurgle. Everything exactly as it should be, a small island of predictability in a day that promised to reshape everything I'd been building toward for 3 years. At exactly 8:30, Tom Harrison walked through the front door, punctual in the way that successful people always seem to be. He wore a charcoal gray suit that looked expensive without being flashy, and carried himself with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in most rooms he entered. What struck me again was his lack of pretension. He nodded to the few early customers already seated with their morning coffee, his manner suggesting genuine respect rather than performative humility. "Good morning, Anna. Thank you for making time for this." "Of course. Coffee first, or would you prefer to talk business right away?" "Coffee definitely. Same as yesterday, if you don't mind." I prepared his dark roast while he settled at a corner table that offered privacy without feeling secretive. The morning crowd was still light, mostly construction workers and hospital staff who were focused on their own conversations or their phones. The perfect environment for a discussion that might change everything. "So," I said, settling across from him with my own cup, "what kind of business opportunity were you thinking about?" Tom took a sip of his coffee and leaned back slightly, studying me with the kind of attention that suggested he'd already done more homework than a casual coffee shop encounter would normally warrant. "I've been looking into your operation here. It's impressive what you've built." The words hit me like a physical sensation, a mixture of pride and wariness that made me careful about my response. "What exactly have you been looking into?" "Mountain View Hospitality Group. 3 restaurants, a catering operation, 2 food trucks, and this coffee shop is your flagship location. Gross revenue last year just under $2 million, with profit margins that would make most restaurant chains envious." He smiled at my expression. I always research potential partners thoroughly. For a moment, the careful balance I'd maintained for 3 years tilted dramatically. Tom Harrison knew exactly who I was, what I'd built, and how successful I'd become, while everyone else saw only the girl behind the coffee counter. The relief was overwhelming, followed immediately by a sharp spike of anxiety about what this meant for the privacy I'd worked so hard to maintain. "How did you find all that information?" "Your catering company has been on our vendor list for 8 months. Every corporate event, every client lunch, every holiday party we've hosted this year has been supplied by Mountain View Hospitality. I started noticing the quality consistency, the attention to detail, the way your staff seemed genuinely invested in making each event successful. So I did some digging. I felt my carefully constructed worlds beginning to collide in ways I hadn't anticipated. Summit Industries had been one of our best corporate clients, generating almost 15% of our catering revenue. Ryan had probably eaten food prepared by my company dozens of times without ever making the connection to his sister-in-law's supposedly meaningless coffee shop job. When I walked in yesterday and saw you behind the counter, it took me about 10 seconds to realize who you were. Anna Davis, founder and CEO of one of the most successful hospitality companies in Colorado, serving coffee with the same attention to excellence that made me want to work with your catering operation in the first place. The conversation was moving faster than I'd expected, forcing me to make decisions about disclosure and strategy without the careful planning I preferred. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Summit Industries is expanding. We're opening offices in Denver, Colorado Springs, and Fort Collins over the next 18 months. Each location will need food service partnerships, catering relationships, and employee amenities that reflect our commitment to quality and community engagement." Tom leaned forward slightly, his expression shifting from casual to serious. "I want Mountain View Hospitality to be our exclusive partner for all of it." The numbers that flashed through my mind were staggering. Summit Industries employed over 3,000 people across Colorado, with an annual budget for food services and corporate events that exceeded what my entire operation currently generated in revenue. An exclusive partnership would triple my business overnight and establish Mountain View Hospitality as one of the premier service providers in the region. "That's a significant commitment," I said, working to keep my voice steady. "What kind of timeline are we talking about?" "The Denver office opens in January. Colorado Springs in March. Fort Collins by summer. I'd want the partnership formalized before the end of this month so we can begin integration planning immediately." "And you're offering this based on 8 months of catering contracts?" Tom's smile suggested he appreciated directness. "I'm offering this based on consistent excellence, innovative menu development, flawless execution under pressure, and the kind of customer service that makes clients specifically request your company for their events." The catering contracts were just the audition. This conversation is the job interview. The magnitude of what he was proposing began to settle over me like a warm coat. This wasn't just a business opportunity, it was validation of every risk I'd taken, every late night I'd spent running numbers and planning expansions, every moment I'd endured my family's condescension while building something they couldn't even comprehend. "There's one thing I need to understand," I said. "You mentioned that you researched Mountain View Hospitality. How much do you know about my personal situation?" "I know that your sister works in accounting at Summit, and that her husband Ryan is one of our project managers. I know that your family seems to be under the impression that you work in food service because you lack other options." Tom paused, choosing his words carefully. I also know that you've chosen to keep the scope of your business activities private, and I respect that choice completely." The relief that flooded through me was almost overwhelming. Tom Harrison understood the game I'd been playing, the reasons I'd maintained the careful separation between my public persona and my business identity. More importantly, he seemed to appreciate the strategic value of that separation. The partnership you're describing would make that privacy difficult to maintain. That's true. Mountain View Hospitality would become a visible player in Colorado's business community. There would be industry recognition, media coverage, probably invitations to join chambers of commerce and business development organizations. Tom met my eyes directly. "The question is whether you're ready to step out of the shadows." I thought about Claire's text message from the previous day, her casual instruction to look presentable for Sunday dinner, her assumption that my presence was something to be managed rather than celebrated. I thought about Ryan, sitting in meetings at Summit Industries, eating food prepared by my company while maintaining the fiction that his sister-in-law was wasting her potential on minimum wage work. When would you need an answer? Take the time you need to consider it properly. But I'll be honest, I'd like to move quickly. The Denver office timeline is aggressive, and I want to ensure we have the right partnerships in place before we start hiring staff and announcing our expansion plans. We spent the next hour discussing specifics. Contract terms, exclusivity clauses, expansion timelines, quality guarantees. Tom had clearly done extensive preparation for this conversation, bringing insights about my operation that impressed me with their accuracy and depth. More importantly, he seemed to understand that successful partnerships required mutual respect rather than corporate dominance. "One more thing," he said as our meeting began to wind down. "I assume you'll want to have your attorney review any formal agreements before signing." "Of course. I'd recommend Jennifer Walsh at Morrison & Associates. She's handled several of our vendor partnerships, and she has a reputation for protecting her clients' interests while maintaining productive relationships." The irony wasn't lost on me that Tom Harrison was recommending an attorney to help me negotiate against his own company's interests. It was the kind of gesture that suggested he viewed this partnership as a long-term relationship rather than a short-term transaction. After he left, I sat alone in the coffee shop for several minutes, processing the enormity of what had just occurred. In the span of an hour, my carefully managed double life had been exposed and validated by one of the most powerful business leaders in Colorado. The partnership he'd offered would transform Mountain View Hospitality from a regional success story into a major player in the state's service industry. More immediately, it would make hiding my achievements from my family impossible. Within weeks, possibly days, Claire and Ryan would discover that the sister they'd dismissed as underachieving had built something far more substantial than either of them had ever accomplished. Beth arrived at 9:30, taking one look at my expression and immediately abandoning her usual morning routine. "What happened?" Tom Harrison offered Mountain View Hospitality an exclusive partnership with Summit Industries. All their Colorado locations, all their corporate events, everything. Beth's eyes widened as she processed the implications. "That's incredible. That's also huge. Like, life-changing huge. It would mean going public with the business. No more pretending to be just a coffee shop employee. No more hiding what I've built. And that terrifies you." I nodded, surprised by how accurately she'd identified my primary emotion. For 3 years, anonymity had been my shield, allowing me to build and experiment and fail without the pressure of family expectations or public scrutiny. The thought of losing that protection was genuinely frightening. "Your sister's going to lose her mind when she finds out," Beth said, her tone suggesting she found this prospect more entertaining than concerning. "My sister's going to feel like I deliberately deceived her. Which, to be fair, I did. You protected yourself. There's a difference." The morning rush began in earnest around 10, waves of customers providing welcome distraction from the decision weighing on my mind. I moved through the familiar rhythm of taking orders and preparing drinks, but part of my attention remained focused on the conversation with Tom Harrison and its potential consequences. During a brief lull around 11, my phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "Reminder about dinner Sunday. Mom's making her famous pot roast. Try not to smell like coffee when you get there." I stared at the message for a long moment, feeling the familiar sting of casual dismissal that had characterized our relationship for as long as I could remember. Try not to smell like coffee. As if the work I did, the customers I served, the business I'd built was somehow shameful or inappropriate. For family gatherings. What would Claire say if she knew that the coffee shop she mocked generated more annual revenue than her salary? What would Ryan think if he discovered that the sister-in-law he patronized was actually the CEO of the company that had catered his most important client meetings? The questions felt different now, charged with possibility rather than resentment. Tom Harrison's offer had given me a choice. I could continue maintaining the careful separation that had protected me for 3 years, or I could step into the full reality of what I'd accomplished and let the consequences fall where they might. Around noon, during another brief quiet period, I found myself pulling out my phone and scrolling through my contacts until I found Jennifer Walsh's number. Tom's recommendation of an attorney felt like more than just professional courtesy. It felt like a signal that he was serious about the partnership and confident that I was capable of handling the complexities it would involve. Walsh & Associates? This is Jennifer. Hi, this is Anna Davis from Mountain View Hospitality Group. Tom Harrison from Summit Industries suggested I give you a call. Of course. Tom mentioned you might be reaching out about a potential partnership agreement. When would be a good time to meet? As soon as possible. This afternoon if you have availability. I can see you at 2 o'clock. Do you have our address? After confirming the appointment, I spent the rest of my lunch break reviewing the financial documents I'd need to bring to the meeting. 3 years of carefully maintained records, profit and loss statements, tax returns, contracts and agreements that told the story of Mountain View Hospitality's growth from single coffee shop to regional hospitality company. The documents painted a picture that even I sometimes found hard to believe. A business that had started with a $20,000 investment had grown into an operation that employed 43 people across 6 locations, generated nearly $2 million in annual revenue, and maintained profit margins that exceeded industry standards by significant percentages. Looking at the numbers objectively, I realized that Tom Harrison's offer made perfect sense from his perspective. Mountain View Hospitality had proven its ability to deliver consistent quality at scale, adapt to different client needs, and maintain operational excellence under pressure. We were exactly the kind of vendor that a growing company would want to partner with for long-term expansion plans. At 1:30, I handed the afternoon shift over to Kevin and drove across town to Jennifer Walsh's office, my mind running through potential scenarios and complications. The legal review would be straightforward, but the personal implications of accepting Tom's offer were far more complex. Going public with Mountain View Hospitality would mean acknowledging that I'd spent 3 years building something significant while allowing my family to believe I was wasting my potential. It would mean admitting that I'd chosen deception over honesty, privacy over transparency, strategic thinking over emotional reaction. Most importantly, it would mean stepping into a version of myself that my family had never seen, never expected, and might not be prepared to accept. The girl who served coffee with a smile was about to become the CEO who signed exclusive contracts with major corporations. Whether Claire and Ryan were ready for that transformation was no longer my primary concern. As I pulled into the parking lot of Walsh & Associates, I realized that the decision had already been made. 3 years of careful planning had led to this moment, this opportunity, this choice between continued anonymity and public success. Tom Harrison's offer wasn't just a business partnership, it was an invitation to claim the achievements I'd earned and stop apologizing for exceeding everyone's expectations. The only question left was whether I was brave enough to accept it. Jennifer Walsh's office occupied the top floor of a restored brick building in downtown Riverside, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered panoramic views of the mountain range beyond the city limits. The space struck a balance between professional authority and approachable warmth, much like the woman herself. Jennifer appeared to be in her early 50s, with silver-streaked auburn hair and the kind of sharp intelligence that made her clients feel both challenged and protected. "Tom Harrison speaks very highly of your operation," she said, gesturing for me to take a seat at the polished conference table. "He's not someone who offers exclusive partnerships lightly." I spread my financial documents across the table, watching as Jennifer's expression shifted from polite interest to genuine surprise as she absorbed the scope of what Mountain View Hospitality had become. The numbers told a story that even I sometimes found difficult to believe, a trajectory of growth that had exceeded my most optimistic projections. "This is remarkable," she said after reviewing the profit and loss statements. "You've achieved something that most restaurant groups take decades to build, and you've done it while maintaining exceptional quality standards. The question is whether accepting Tom's partnership offer is the right strategic move." Jennifer leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled as she considered the implications. "From a purely business perspective, it's an extraordinary opportunity. Summit Industries is financially solid, their expansion plans are well-funded, and their reputation in the corporate community would add significant credibility to your brand. And from other perspectives? That depends on what other considerations are important to you. Tom mentioned that you've maintained a low profile deliberately. This partnership would make that impossible." I explained the family situation. The careful separation I'd maintained between my public persona and my business achievements, the reasons I'd chosen anonymity over recognition. Jennifer listened without judgment, asking clarifying questions that helped me articulate concerns I hadn't fully acknowledged. Family dynamics in business can be complicated, she said finally. But you can't build your professional decisions around other people's inability to handle your success. The words hit me with unexpected force. For 3 years, I'd convinced myself that privacy was a strategic choice, but Jennifer's observation made me wonder if I'd been protecting my family's feelings at the expense of my own growth. What would the timeline look like if I decided to move forward? Tom wants to finalize the partnership by month's end. That gives us 3 weeks to negotiate terms, conduct due diligence, and prepare contracts. It's aggressive but manageable if you're committed to the process. We spent the next 2 hours working through the details. Contract terms, exclusivity clauses, expansion schedules, quality guarantees, termination conditions. Jennifer's questions were thorough and occasionally uncomfortable, forcing me to think through scenarios I hadn't considered. One thing that concerns me, she said during a break in our discussion, is the disparity in company size. Summit Industries has significant leverage in this relationship. We need to ensure that the contract protects Mountain View Hospitality's interests and maintains your operational independence. What kind of protections are you thinking about? Minimum volume guarantees, price escalation clauses, intellectual property protections for your recipes and service protocols. Most importantly, termination provisions that prevent Summit from canceling the contract without substantial penalties. The legal complexity was daunting, but Jennifer's expertise was reassuring. More importantly, her approach suggested that she viewed this as a negotiation between equals rather than a large corporation doing a favor for a small business. By 5 o'clock, we had outlined a strategy for moving forward. Jennifer would prepare initial contract language based on our discussion, while I would conduct internal assessments to ensure Mountain View Hospitality could handle the operational demands of tripling our business volume. One final question, Jennifer said as we prepared to conclude the meeting. Are you ready for the public attention this will bring? Local business journals, Chamber of Commerce recognition, probably some media coverage when the partnership is announced? The question lingered in my mind as I drove back across town toward the coffee shop. Public attention had never been part of my vision for Mountain View Hospitality. I'd built the company quietly, deliberately, focusing on operational excellence rather than marketing or self-promotion. The thought of media coverage and industry recognition felt foreign and slightly intimidating. More immediately concerning was the family dinner on Sunday. In less than 72 hours, I would be sitting at my parents' dining room table, listening to Claire's casual condescension while knowing that I was about to sign a contract that would fundamentally alter everything she believed about success and achievement. The coffee shop was busy when I returned, the late afternoon crowd of students and remote workers creating the kind of productive buzz that had always made me proud of what we'd built. Beth was training a new employee, demonstrating the espresso machine with the patient expertise that made her such an effective manager. How did the lawyer meeting go? She asked during a brief lull. Complicated but promising. Jennifer thinks the partnership is a good opportunity, but she wants to make sure we're protected in the negotiations. And you're still worried about the family fallout? It wasn't a question. Beth had known me long enough to read the anxiety I was trying to hide. Sunday dinner is going to be interesting. You could always tell them before the business announcement goes public. Give them a chance to process it privately. The suggestion had merit, but something about it felt wrong. Why should I manage their emotions about my success? Why should I prepare them for achievements that I'd earned through years of hard work and strategic thinking? Or, Beth continued, you could let them find out the same way everyone else does. Through official channels, media coverage, industry recognition. No special treatment, no family privileges, just the truth revealed when you're ready to reveal it. The idea was appealing in its simplicity and fairness. For 3 years, my family had chosen to see me as underachieving, despite evidence that might have suggested otherwise. They'd made assumptions about my potential, my ambitions, my capabilities without ever asking questions that would have revealed the reality of what I was building. That evening, I worked late in my apartment, reviewing operational reports and expansion plans while my mind processed the day's revelations. The partnership with Summit Industries would require hiring additional staff, expanding our catering kitchen, possibly opening new locations to handle increased demand. The logistics were manageable but would require careful planning and significant investment. More challenging was the psychological adjustment. For 3 years, I'd been comfortable operating below the radar, building something significant without the pressure of external expectations or public scrutiny. Success had been measured in private victories, profitable quarters, satisfied clients, operational improvements that nobody outside my company would ever notice or appreciate. Going public with Mountain View Hospitality would mean trading that comfortable anonymity for industry recognition, media attention, and the kind of visibility that would make my family's assumptions impossible to maintain. It would mean claiming achievements I'd earned while risking relationships I'd spent my entire life trying to preserve. Around midnight, as I was preparing for bed, my phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. Looking forward to Sunday dinner. Tom Harrison mentioned he'd been working with a local catering company that's really impressive. Small world. I stared at the message for a long moment, feeling the walls of my carefully constructed double life beginning to crumble. Ryan had no idea that his casual observation was about to become the catalyst for revelations that would reshape his understanding of his sister-in-law's capabilities. The next morning arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that made indoor work feel especially appealing. I spent the early hours at the coffee shop reviewing staffing schedules and inventory reports, tasks that normally provided comforting routine but today felt like preparation for a transformation I wasn't sure I was ready to embrace. Tom Harrison called at 10:30, his voice carrying the energy of someone accustomed to moving quickly on opportunities. I wanted to follow up on yesterday's conversation. Have you had a chance to consider the partnership proposal? I met with Jennifer Walsh yesterday afternoon. She's reviewing the terms and preparing contract language. Excellent. I was hoping you might be available for lunch today. There are a few additional details I'd like to discuss, and I think it would be helpful for you to meet some of the team you'd be working with. The invitation felt like both an opportunity and a test. Meeting Tom's team would provide valuable insights into Summit Industries' culture and expectations, but it would also represent another step toward the public revelation I was still uncertain about embracing. What time and where? Noon at the Summit Industries executive dining room. It's casual, just a chance for everyone to get acquainted. After hanging up, I found myself facing another wardrobe decision. The lunch meeting would be my first appearance at Summit Industries as Anna Davis, CEO of Mountain View Hospitality, rather than Anna Davis, Ryan's sister-in-law who worked at a coffee shop. The distinction felt significant enough to warrant careful consideration. I chose a navy blue dress with a matching blazer, professional but not overly formal, paired with heels that added confidence without appearing aggressive. The goal was to look like someone who belonged in corporate boardrooms while remaining approachable enough for collaborative partnerships. Summit Industries occupied a gleaming glass tower in the financial district, the kind of building that announced corporate success without apology. The lobby was impressive in its understated elegance, all polished granite and contemporary artwork that suggested both prosperity and sophisticated taste. Tom met me at the elevator bank, his manner suggesting genuine pleasure at seeing me again. I'm glad you could make it. The team is excited to meet you. The executive dining room occupied a corner of the 15th floor, with windows offering spectacular views of the Rocky Mountains. The space was designed for productive conversations, with several intimate seating areas that allowed for both formal presentations and casual discussions. Anna, I'd like you to meet Sarah Chen, our Director of Corporate Services, and Mark Stevens, who heads our Facilities Management Division. They'll be your primary contacts for the partnership implementation. Sarah was probably in her late 30s, with the kind of polished professionalism that suggested significant experience managing complex vendor relationships. Mark appeared to be a few years older, with an engineer's attention to detail and the practical manner of someone who understood operational challenges. Tom's been telling us about Mountain View Hospitality, Sarah said as we settled at a table near the windows. Your reputation in the catering community is excellent. We've used your services for several client events, Mark added. The quality and reliability have been consistently outstanding. The conversation that followed was both professional assessment and social introduction. Sarah and Mark asked thoughtful questions about our operational capacity, expansion capabilities, and quality assurance processes. Their approach suggested that they viewed this partnership as a long-term relationship requiring mutual understanding and respect. One thing that impressed us about your company, Sarah said during lunch, is the way your staff seems genuinely invested in client satisfaction. That's not common in the service industry. We try to hire people who understand that exceptional service comes from caring about outcomes rather than just completing tasks. That philosophy is evident in everything you do, Mark said. It's why Tom was so interested in formalizing this partnership. As the meal progressed, I found myself increasingly comfortable with the dynamic. These were serious professionals who understood the complexities of vendor relationships and appreciated the value that Mountain View Hospitality could bring to Summit Industries' expansion plans. There is one thing I should mention, Tom said as our lunch began to wind down. The partnership announcement will probably generate some media attention. Summit Industries has a fairly high profile in the Colorado business community, and exclusive vendor partnerships always attract interest from trade publications. The reminder sent a familiar flutter of anxiety through my chest. Media attention meant public recognition, industry visibility, the end of the anonymity that had protected me for 3 years. What kind of timeline are we looking at for public announcements? If we can finalize the contract by the end of this month, I'd like to announce the partnership in early November. That gives us time to begin implementation planning for the Denver office opening in January. November 1st was less than 2 weeks away. 2 weeks to finalize contract negotiations, complete due diligence, and prepare for the public revelation. That would fundamentally alter my family's understanding of who I was and what I'd accomplished. I want to be transparent about something, I said, choosing my words carefully. My family doesn't know about the scope of Mountain View Hospitality's operations. They think I work in food service because I lack other options. Tom's expression didn't change, but I caught a glance exchanged between Sarah and Mark that suggested this information wasn't entirely surprising. That must be challenging, Sarah said diplomatically. It's been a choice I made for personal reasons. But I realize that this partnership will make maintaining that privacy impossible. Family dynamics can be complicated, Tom said. But professional decisions should be based on business merit rather than personal relationships. The observation echoed Jennifer Walsh's advice from the previous day, reinforcing the growing conviction that I'd been limiting my own potential to protect other people's assumptions. After lunch, Tom walked me back to the elevator bank, his manner suggesting that the meeting had accomplished its intended purposes. Sarah and Mark were impressed. They're excited about the partnership possibilities. They're both clearly excellent at what they do. I think we'd work well together. I have one more question for you, Tom said as we waited for the elevator. Are you ready to be recognized for what you've built? Because once this partnership is announced, there's no going back to anonymity. The question hung in the air as the elevator doors opened. I stepped inside, turned to face him, and realized that the answer had been crystallizing throughout our conversation. Yes, I said simply. I'm ready. As the elevator descended toward the lobby, I felt something shift inside me, a fundamental realignment of priorities and self-perception. For 3 years, I'd been building something remarkable while hiding from the recognition it deserved. Tom Harrison's partnership offer had given me permission to step into the full reality of my achievements. Sunday dinner at my parents' house was now less than 48 hours away. In less than 2 days, I would sit at the same table where Claire had spent years dismissing my potential, knowing that I was about to sign contracts that would make her assumptions impossible to maintain. The girl who served coffee was about to become the CEO who commanded exclusive partnerships with major corporations. Whether my family was ready for that transformation was no longer my responsibility to manage. Sunday morning dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of brilliant blue sky that made Colorado feel like the most beautiful place on earth. I stood in my closet at 9 o'clock, considering outfit options with the strategic attention of a general preparing for battle. Today's family dinner would be the last time I sat at my parents' table as the underachieving daughter who worked at a coffee shop. By tomorrow morning, everything would be different. I selected a simple black dress with a cardigan, nothing that would draw attention or suggest I was trying to prove anything. The goal was to appear exactly as my family expected me to appear, right up until the moment when their expectations collided with reality. The drive to my parents' house in the suburbs took 20 minutes through neighborhoods that held the archaeology of my childhood. Past the elementary school where I'd first learned that being smart didn't automatically make you popular, past the high school where I discovered that academic achievement was often less valued than social conformity, past the community college where I'd spent 2 years before transferring to finish my business degree. My parents lived in a modest ranch house on Elm Street, the same house where Claire and I had grown up sharing a bathroom and competing for attention in ways that had shaped our relationship ever since. The driveway was already crowded with cars when I arrived. Claire's silver BMW, Ryan's black pickup truck, and Tom Harrison's dark blue sedan parked with the precision of someone accustomed to making good impressions. Tom Harrison was here. At my family's dinner table. The irony was so perfect it felt like something out of a novel. I sat in my car for a moment, gathering courage for what was about to unfold. Through the front window, I could see movement in the kitchen, my mother Patricia bustling around with the controlled chaos that always preceded family gatherings. The scene looked exactly as it had for years, comfortable and familiar and completely unprepared for the revelation that was about to reshape everything. The front door opened before I could knock, revealing my father Robert with his characteristic blend of warmth and mild exasperation that seemed to define his approach to family management. "Anna, sweetheart, come in. Your mother's been cooking." All morning, and your sister's been asking where you were. The living room was arranged exactly as I remembered from countless family gatherings. Claire sat on the sofa next to Ryan, both of them dressed with the careful attention to appearance that suggested this dinner was as much about impressing Tom Harrison as it was about family bonding. Tom himself sat in my father's favorite armchair, looking relaxed and genuinely interested in whatever conversation had been taking place before my arrival. Anna, Claire said, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she wanted to establish hierarchy in front of outsiders. We're just telling Tom about your work at the coffee shop. He was fascinated to hear about the service industry perspective. The condescension was so subtle that someone who didn't know Claire might have missed it entirely. The implication that my work was valuable only as a curiosity, a glimpse into how the other half lived, rather than something worthy of respect in its own right. Actually, Tom said, standing to greet me with a smile that suggested shared secrets, Anna and I have met before. She makes excellent coffee. You've been to Mountain View? Ryan asked, surprise evident in his voice. I wouldn't have expected that to be on your usual route. I had a meeting in that area last week. Best coffee I've had in years. Claire's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. She'd spent years using my coffee shop job as evidence of my lack of ambition, and having her husband's boss praise the quality of my work disrupted the narrative she'd constructed about my failure to achieve meaningful success. Anna's always been good with customer service, she said, the words technically complimentary but delivered with the kind of faint praise that managed to sound dismissive. It's a valuable skill, even if it's not exactly a career. The familiar sting of Claire's casual cruelty hit me with less force than usual. Sitting across from Tom Harrison, knowing what I knew about the partnership negotiations, her words felt less like personal attacks and more like evidence of how thoroughly she'd misjudged both my capabilities and my achievements. Dinner's ready. My mother called from the kitchen, providing welcome relief from the conversation's uncomfortable undercurrents. The dining room table was set with my mother's good china, the floral pattern that came out only for special occasions and important guests. Tom Harrison clearly qualified as sufficiently important to warrant the formal treatment that my family reserved for people they wanted to impress. The meal began with the predictable small talk that characterized most family gatherings. Weather, local news, work updates that carefully avoided anything controversial or challenging. Claire dominated most of the conversation, clearly enjoying the opportunity to showcase her knowledge of corporate culture for Tom's benefit. Ryan's been working on the Denver expansion planning, she said, cutting her pot roast with the precise movements of someone accustomed to maintaining perfect appearances. It's such an exciting opportunity for Summit Industries. The Denver project is going to be significant, Tom agreed. We're planning to hire over 200 people in the first year alone. That must require extensive vendor coordination. I said, the comment innocent enough but loaded with private meaning. Tom's eyes met mine across the table, a flicker of amusement in his expression. Absolutely. Finding the right service partners is crucial for that kind of expansion. Anna wouldn't know much about corporate partnerships, Claire said with a laugh that managed to sound both affectionate and patronizing. The coffee business is pretty straightforward compared to what we deal with in the corporate world. The words hung in the air for a moment, creating an opening that I could either ignore or step through. I looked around the table at my family, gathered together in the same configuration that had defined Sunday dinners for as long as I could remember, and realized that this moment had been building toward itself for 3 years. Actually, I said, my voice calm and clear, I probably know more about corporate partnerships than you might expect. Claire's fork paused halfway to her mouth. What do you mean? Mountain View Coffee isn't just a coffee shop. It's the flagship location of Mountain View Hospitality Group. We operate 6 locations, employ 43 people, and generate just under $2 million in annual revenue. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the soft clink of my father's fork against his plate as he set it down with careful precision. Claire's face had gone pale, her eyes wide with something that looked like confusion mixed with disbelief. That's impossible, she said finally. You work behind a counter. You make coffee for construction workers. I also own the company. That's been catering Summit Industries corporate events for the past 8 months, I continued, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. Every client lunch you've attended, every holiday party, every corporate celebration has been supplied by my company. Ryan's expression shifted from confusion to recognition, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. The catering company that did our quarterly meeting last month. That was yours? Mountain View Hospitality has been Tom's preferred vendor for all major corporate events. In fact, we're in negotiations for an exclusive partnership that will cover all of Summit Industries' Colorado expansion. Tom nodded confirmation, his manner suggesting that he was genuinely enjoying watching this revelation unfold. Anna's company has been exceptional to work with. Professional, reliable, innovative. Everything you want in a strategic partner. Claire looked as if she'd been physically struck. Her carefully constructed narrative about my lack of achievement, my failure to live up to my potential, my need for guidance and condescension, was crumbling in real time. "Why didn't you tell us?" my mother asked, her voice soft with hurt, rather than anger. The question was fair and deserved an honest answer. Because I wanted to build something without having to justify it to people who had already decided I was wasting my potential. Because I needed space to succeed or fail without family expectations affecting my decisions. "You let us think you were struggling," Claire said, her voice rising slightly. "You let us worry about your future, your financial security, your ability to take care of yourself. Did you worry?" I asked, genuine curiosity in my voice. "Or did you use my supposed failure to feel better about your own choices?" The accusation hung between us like a challenge. Claire's face flushed red, a combination of embarrassment and anger that made her look younger and more vulnerable than I'd seen her in years. "That's not fair," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it? How many times have you used my coffee shop job as evidence that your corporate career was more meaningful? How many conversations have ended with some variation of, at least I'm building something with my life?" Tom cleared his throat gently, his intervention diplomatic but firm. "Perhaps this is a conversation better continued privately. I don't want to intrude on family matters." "No," my father said, speaking for the first time since my revelation began. "You're not intruding. Anna, what you've accomplished is remarkable. I'm proud of you, and I'm sorry that you felt you couldn't share it with us." The simple acknowledgement meant more than I'd expected. My father had always been the peacekeeper in our family, the one who tried to smooth over conflicts rather than address their root causes. His willingness to validate my achievements, even in the midst of family tension, felt like a gift I hadn't known I needed. "The partnership announcement will be public next week," I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. "There will probably be some media coverage, industry recognition. I wanted you to hear it from me before you read about it in the business section." "Media coverage?" Claire's voice was barely above a whisper. "Mountain View Hospitality is about to become Summit Industries' exclusive food service partner for their Colorado expansion. It's a significant contract, probably the largest in our company's history." Tom nodded confirmation. "The partnership will triple Anna's business volume overnight. It's the kind of growth that gets noticed in the industry." The conversation that followed was stilted, marked by long pauses and careful navigation around emotional landmines. My mother asked practical questions about the business, my father wanted to know about expansion plans, Ryan showed genuine curiosity about how I'd managed to build something so substantial without anyone noticing. Claire said very little, her usual confidence replaced by something that looked like shock mixed with resentment. The dynamic that had defined our relationship for years had been fundamentally altered, and she seemed to be struggling to process the implications. "I should probably get going," Tom said as dinner wound down, his departure timed with the diplomacy of someone experienced in managing delicate situations. "Anna, I'll have Jennifer send over the final contract language tomorrow morning." "Thank you for coming," my mother said, walking him to the door with the kind of gracious hospitality she reserved for people she genuinely liked rather than people she was trying to impress. After Tom left, the house felt smaller, the air thicker with unspoken tensions and unresolved questions. Claire helped my mother clear the table with mechanical precision, her movements suggesting that she was operating on autopilot while her mind processed the evening's revelations. "Why Mountain View Hospitality?" Ryan asked as we loaded the dishwasher. "Why that name?" Mountain View was the first thing I saw when I signed the lease for the coffee shop. The name felt right, like it captured both where we were and where we wanted to go. "And you've been planning this expansion for how long?" 3 years. Since the beginning. The coffee shop was always meant to be the foundation for something larger. Claire finally spoke, her voice tight with emotions I couldn't quite identify. "You made us look like fools." Sitting there, telling Tom about the service industry perspective, talking about Anna's customer service skills. "You knew exactly what you were doing." I was protecting something I'd built from people who had already decided it wasn't worth protecting. "We're your family. We deserve to know." "Did you?" I asked, the question sharper than I'd intended. "When was the last time you asked about my work without making it clear that you thought it was beneath me? When did you ever express interest in what I was building rather than concern about what I was failing to achieve?" The accusation hit its target. Claire's face crumpled slightly, the careful composure she'd maintained throughout dinner finally cracking under the weight of self-examination. I thought I was encouraging you to want more, she said quietly. You were encouraging me to want what you wanted. There's a difference. The drive home felt different, charged with the relief of finally stepping into the full truth of what I'd accomplished. The secret that had protected me for 3 years was gone, replaced by the freedom to claim achievements I'd earned and recognition I deserved. My phone buzzed with a text from Beth as I pulled into my parking space. How did dinner go? I told them everything. About the business, about the partnership, about what I've been building. Her response came immediately. How do you feel? I sat in my car for a moment, considering the question. How did I feel? Exhausted, certainly. Relieved, absolutely. But also something else, something that felt like coming home to myself after a long journey through foreign territory. Free, I typed back. I feel free. The next morning would bring contract reviews, expansion planning, media interviews, and all the responsibilities that came with stepping into the public recognition I'd avoided for so long. But tonight, I felt the profound satisfaction of finally living without apology for the success I'd created through years of careful planning and relentless execution. The girl who served coffee had introduced herself to the woman who owned the company. My family would need time to adjust to this new reality, but their adjustment was no longer my responsibility to manage. I had work to do, partnerships to formalize, and a business empire to expand. The transformation was complete, and there was no going back. Monday morning arrived with the kind of electric energy that follows major life changes, when the world looks simultaneously familiar and completely transformed. I woke up at 5:30 without an alarm, my mind already racing through the day's agenda with an intensity that made sleep impossible. Today would mark the beginning of my public life as Anna Davis, CEO of Mountain View Hospitality Group, rather than Anna Davis, the coffee shop employee who'd been hiding her achievements for 3 years. The contract documents from Jennifer Walsh were waiting in my email inbox, 47 pages of legal language that would formalize the partnership with Summit Industries and fundamentally alter the trajectory of my business. I printed everything at the coffee shop before opening, spreading the papers across a corner table while the morning light filtered through the front windows. The terms were better than I'd dared to hope. Minimum volume guarantees, price escalation clauses, intellectual property protections for our recipes and service protocols, termination provisions that heavily favored Mountain View hospitality. Jennifer had negotiated with the skill of someone who understood that successful partnerships required mutual respect rather than corporate dominance. Beth arrived at 7, taking one look at the paperwork and immediately understanding the significance of what was happening. This is it, isn't it? The moment everything changes. Contract signing is scheduled for 10 o'clock at Tom's office. Media announcement goes out this afternoon. By evening, everyone in Riverside will know what Mountain View hospitality really is. And how are you feeling about that? I considered the question while preparing the morning's first pot of coffee, the familiar ritual providing comfort amid the controlled chaos of transformation. Terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. Like standing at the edge of a cliff knowing you have to jump but not quite sure where you'll land. The breakfast rush proceeded with its usual intensity. But everything felt different. Each customer interaction carried the weight of impending change, each routine task marked by the knowledge that this might be one of the last mornings I spent behind the counter serving coffee to construction workers and hospital staff who knew me only as the friendly woman who remembered their orders. At 9:30, I changed into the navy blue suit I'd brought for the contract signing, transforming from coffee shop employee to corporate executive in the small employee bathroom that had witnessed countless similar transformations over the past 3 years. The woman looking back at me in the mirror was the same person who'd served lattes an hour earlier, but the context was about to change everything. Summit Industries' lobby felt different this time, less intimidating and more welcoming, as if the building itself recognized my right to be there. Tom's assistant, a efficient woman named Margaret, escorted me to the executive conference room, where Tom, Jennifer, and 2 other Summit Industries executives were already assembled. Anna, perfect timing, Tom said, rising to greet me with the kind of professional warmth that suggested genuine pleasure at seeing a business partnership come to fruition. I'd like you to meet David Chen, our Chief Operating Officer, and Lisa Martinez, our Director of Legal Affairs. The introductions were brief but significant, marking my formal entry into Summit Industries' inner circle. These were people who would be integral to the partnership's success, and their welcoming manner suggested that Tom had prepared them to view Mountain View Hospitality as a valued partner rather than just another vendor. The contract signing itself was surprisingly anticlimactic. Jennifer had reviewed every clause, Tom's team had approved all modifications, and the terms had been negotiated to everyone's satisfaction. 47 pages reduced to signatures on signature lines, initials. Beside amendments, a handshake that formalized what had begun as a chance encounter over coffee. The press release goes out in 30 minutes, Lisa said as we concluded the legal formalities. Local business journal, regional trade publications, our internal newsletter. By noon, this partnership will be public knowledge. The weight of that statement settled over me like a blanket. In 30 minutes, the careful separation I'd maintained between my public persona and my business achievements would be permanently erased. Anna Davis, the coffee shop employee, would be revealed as Anna Davis, the CEO, and there would be no going back to anonymity. "Are you ready for this?" Tom asked, his question carrying genuine concern for my comfort with the upcoming publicity. "As ready as someone can be for their entire life to change," I said, meaning it. The first indication that the media announcement had been released came at 11:45, when my phone started buzzing with text messages from friends, acquaintances, and business contacts who'd seen the news. Beth texted from the coffee shop with barely contained excitement. "Local radio just announced it. You're famous." My parents called 10 minutes later, my mother's voice carrying a mixture of pride and bewilderment that suggested she was still processing the previous evening's revelations. "Anna, sweetheart, your father just heard about your partnership on the business news. They called you one of Colorado's most promising young entrepreneurs." "It's all very surreal," I admitted, standing in Summit Industries' lobby and watching the Denver skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. "We're proud of you," my father said, his voice carrying across the speakerphone with quiet conviction. "We should have said that sooner and more often." Claire didn't call. The afternoon brought a parade of interviews and photo sessions that felt like stepping into someone else's life. The local business journal wanted a feature story about young entrepreneurs reshaping Colorado's hospitality industry. A regional magazine requested a photo shoot at the flagship coffee shop location. The Chamber of Commerce extended an invitation to speak at their monthly luncheon about small business success strategies. Each interaction required a slight recalibration of identity. I was no longer the private business owner who preferred to work behind the scenes, but the public face of a company that had suddenly become newsworthy. The attention was overwhelming and gratifying in equal measure, validation of achievements I'd been protecting from scrutiny for 3 years. The most surreal moment came during the Business Journal interview, when the reporter asked about my management philosophy and growth strategies. 3 hours earlier, I'd been serving coffee to customers who knew me only as the friendly woman behind the counter. Now I was being quoted in publications that would be read by every significant business leader in Colorado. "What advice would you give to other young entrepreneurs who are trying to build something significant?" the reporter asked, her question genuine rather than perfunctory. "Build something that matters to you first, and worry about external validation later. Success that depends on other people's approval is fragile. Success that comes from creating value is sustainable." The words felt true as I spoke them, a distillation of 3 years' worth of lessons learned through trial and error, strategic thinking, and the kind of patient persistence that most people weren't willing to invest. By 5 o'clock, the media obligations were complete, and I found myself back at the coffee shop, surrounded by the familiar comfort of a business I'd built from the ground up. The evening crowd was different than usual, a mixture of regular customers and curiosity seekers who'd heard the news and wanted to see the coffee shop that had launched a hospitality empire. "Anna," called Mike Peterson, a construction foreman who'd been ordering the same large dark roast every morning for 2 years. "Saw you on the news. Couldn't believe it was the same person who makes my coffee." "Same person," I said, preparing his usual order with the practiced efficiency that had become second nature. "Just a few more responsibilities now." "Always knew there was something special about this place," said Jennifer Walsh, a nurse from the hospital who typically ordered a caramel macchiato during her afternoon break. "The service was too good to be accidental." The comments and congratulations continued throughout the evening, each interaction a small validation of the choice to finally step into public recognition of what I'd accomplished. These were people who'd known me only as the coffee shop employee, and their genuine pleasure at discovering my broader achievements felt like the best kind of surprise party. Beth found me around 7 o'clock, sitting at the corner table where I'd spread out contract documents that morning, reviewing expansion plans and implementation timelines for the Summit Industries partnership. "How does it feel?" she asked, settling into the chair across from me with 2 cups of coffee and the satisfied expression of someone who'd watched a friend achieve something significant. "Like stepping out of a costume I'd been wearing for 3 years. Liberating and terrifying and exactly right." "Any regrets about keeping it secret for so long?" I considered the question while watching the evening light fade behind the mountains, visible through our front windows. "No regrets about the privacy. It protected something I needed to build without interference. But I'm glad that phase is over." "What about your family? Any word from Claire?" The question I'd been avoiding all day finally demanded attention. Claire hadn't called, texted, or acknowledged the media coverage in any way. The silence felt pointed, a reaction to the previous evening's revelations that suggested hurt feelings and wounded pride rather than celebration of my achievements. She needs time to process, I said, the words diplomatic but honest. This changes how she sees me, how she sees herself, how she understands our relationship. That's not easy to adjust to overnight. And if she can't adjust? Then we'll have different relationship than we've had before. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. The next few days blurred together in a kaleidoscope of contract negotiations, hiring interviews, facility expansion planning, and media appearances that marked my full emergence into Colorado's business community. Mountain View Hospitality had gone from a well-kept secret to a recognized player in the state's hospitality industry, and the transition required constant adaptation to new responsibilities and expectations. The partnership with Summit Industries officially launched the following Monday, marked by a ribbon-cutting ceremony at their Denver office location that drew coverage from 3 local television stations and 2 business publications. I stood next to Tom Harrison, scissors in hand, wearing a charcoal gray dress that struck the right balance between professional authority and approachable competence. This partnership represents Summit Industries' commitment to working with Colorado-based companies that share our values of excellence, innovation, and community engagement, Tom said to the assembled crowd of reporters, business leaders, and Summit Industries employees. We're honored to support Summit Industries' expansion and excited about the opportunities this partnership creates for both companies, I responded, my voice steady despite the surreal nature of being interviewed on television about a business I'd been hiding from my family just 2 weeks earlier. The ceremony concluded with a catered lunch provided by Mountain View Hospitality, a showcase of our capabilities that doubled as practical demonstration of why Summit Industries had chosen us as their exclusive food service partner. Watching corporate executives, media representatives, and industry colleagues enjoy food prepared by my team felt like the most satisfying kind of validation. 3 weeks after the contract signing, I received an unexpected phone call that would mark the final transformation in my relationship with my family. Claire's name appeared on my phone screen during a brief afternoon lull at the coffee shop, her first contact since the dinner table revelation that had changed everything. Anna, it's me. Do you have a few minutes to talk? Her voice carried a quality I hadn't heard in years, tentative and vulnerable rather than confident and directive. Of course. What's going on? I've been thinking about what happened at dinner, about what you said about us never asking about your work or showing interest in what you were building. I waited, sensing that she needed space to work through whatever she was trying to say. You were right. I did use your coffee shop job to feel better about my own choices. I told myself I was encouraging you to want more, but really I was protecting my own sense of achievement by making sure yours seemed smaller. The admission hung between us, honest and painful and necessary. That couldn't have been easy to recognize. Ryan helped me see it. He pointed out that I've spent 3 years complaining about your lack of ambition to people who now know you built a $2 million company while I was criticizing your work ethic. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't been so fundamentally sad. Claire, I never wanted to make you look foolish. I just needed space to build something without having to justify every decision to people who'd already decided I was wasting my potential. I know that now. I also know that I owe you an apology that's about 3 years overdue. You don't owe me anything. We both made choices that made sense to us at the time. I owe you respect. I owe you acknowledgement of what you've accomplished. I owe you recognition that you knew what you were doing even when I thought you were throwing your life away. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, marked by the kind of honest communication that had been missing from our relationship for years. Claire asked genuine questions about the business, expressed authentic curiosity about my expansion plans, acknowledged achievements she'd been too proud or stubborn to recognize before. There's something else, she said as our conversation began to wind down. Ryan's been talking about leaving Summit Industries to start his own consulting firm. He was wondering if you might have any advice about building a business from the ground up. The request represented a complete reversal of our family's traditional dynamic. Instead of Claire offering guidance about career advancement, she was asking me to mentor her husband's entrepreneurial ambitions. The shift was profound and oddly satisfying, not because I enjoyed being in a position of authority but because it represented genuine recognition of expertise I'd earned through years of strategic thinking and calculated risk-taking. I'd be happy to talk with Ryan about it. Building a business is challenging, but it's also incredibly rewarding when you're creating something that matters to you. Thank you. And Anna, I'm proud of what you've built. I should have said that sooner. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of Mountain View Hospitality's new headquarters, a renovated warehouse space in downtown Riverside that housed our expanded catering kitchen, administrative offices, and a demonstration area where clients could sample menu options and observe food preparation. The space represented everything I'd been working toward, a physical manifestation of achievements that had once existed only in spreadsheets and business plans. The company had grown to employ 78 people across 9 locations, with gross revenue projecting to exceed $4 million by year's end. The Summit Industries partnership had provided the foundation for expansion that included contracts with 3 other major corporations, 2 university systems, and the city of Denver's convention center. More importantly, Mountain View Hospitality had earned recognition as one of Colorado's fastest-growing companies, with invitations to industry conferences, requests for speaking engagements, and the kind of professional respect that had seemed impossible during those early days of serving coffee while building an empire in secret. "The space looks incredible," Beth said, joining me in the lobby after a meeting with our newest hire, a former restaurant chain executive who would oversee our expansion into the Colorado Springs market. "Remember when you were planning all this from your apartment above the bookstore? It feels like a different lifetime," I said, meaning it. "Like watching someone else's dreams come true. They were always your dreams. You just finally gave yourself permission to claim them." The observation was accurate and profound, a reminder that the most significant transformation hadn't been business growth or industry recognition, but the psychological shift from hiding achievements to embracing them. The girl who'd served coffee while building a company in secret had become the CEO who signed exclusive partnerships with major corporations, and the journey between those 2 identities had required courage I hadn't known I possessed. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom Harrison, whose partnership had catalyzed everything that followed. "Congratulations on the Colorado Springs announcement. Looking forward to seeing what you build next." What I would build next was already taking shape in business plans and feasibility studies that filled filing cabinets in my new office. Mountain View Hospitality's expansion into Wyoming and New Mexico, a franchise model that would allow entrepreneurs in other states to license our brand and operational systems, partnerships with culinary schools that would provide training programs for aspiring food service professionals. The possibilities felt limitless, bounded only by imagination and the willingness to take calculated risks in service of something larger than immediate comfort. The coffee shop that had launched everything remained our flagship location, a reminder of humble beginnings and the value of building something meaningful rather than just profitable. As the sun set behind the Rocky Mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. 3 years earlier, I'd been a young woman with a business degree and a dream, willing to serve coffee and endure family condescension while building something extraordinary in the shadows. Today, I was the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, recognized throughout Colorado as an innovative leader in the hospitality industry, respected by peers who valued both my business acumen and my commitment to operational excellence. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, but it had been worth every moment of patience, every strategic decision, every day of building something remarkable while other people weren't paying attention. The phone call from my mother that evening brought the story full circle, her voice carrying the kind of maternal pride that had been missing during those years when she'd worried about my choices and wondered about my future. "Anna, sweetheart, I just wanted you to know that your father and I are so proud of what you've accomplished. We were wrong to worry, wrong to question your judgment, wrong to assume we knew better than you did about your own life. You were being parents," I said, the forgiveness genuine and complete. "You wanted what you thought was best for me. What's best for you is what makes you happy, what challenges you, what allows you to build something that matters to you. We see that now." As I prepared for bed that night in my new apartment overlooking downtown Riverside, I thought about the woman who'd driven to her parents' house just 6 months earlier, dreading another evening of subtle condescension and casual dismissal of her potential. That woman had been successful, accomplished, building something remarkable, but she'd been hiding her achievements from the people who should have been celebrating them. The woman going to bed tonight owned her success completely, claimed her achievements without apology, and had learned that respect earned through excellence was more valuable than approval granted through conformity. The journey from one version of myself to the other had required courage, patience, strategic thinking, and the willingness to trust my own judgment even when everyone else seemed to doubt it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, expansion opportunities, partnership negotiations, and the endless complexity of building something sustainable and meaningful in an industry that demanded constant innovation. But tonight, I felt the deep satisfaction of having built exactly the life I'd envisioned, achieved exactly the success I'd planned for, and earned exactly the respect I'd worked to deserve. The girl who'd served coffee while building an empire had become the woman who owned the empire and still remembered the value of excellent coffee. The transformation was complete, the recognition was earned, and the future was limited only by my willingness to keep building something remarkable. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.